In the 4th year of my marriage to Leah Monroe, she was in a car accident. When she woke up, her memory was stuck in the time when she was most in love with her first love. She couldn't believe we were married and insisted that she had always hated me. I tried everything I could to make her remember our 4 years together, but nothing worked. Then, after another accident, I watched her run toward her first love without a second thought, and I finally gave up. The day I agreed to divorce, she suddenly remembered me. But by then, I had already given up. The day Leah Monroe woke up, she insisted on divorcing me. I was holding a pot of soup I'd been simmering all night when I reached the door, and she threw her water cup at my feet. "Get out. I don't want to see you." A few drops of scalding water splashed on my hand. I forced a smile and pretended not to care, saying, "I made some soup. Would you like to have some?" Leah Monroe turned her back, refusing to look at me, and just muttered 2 words, "Leave," after I put the soup down and left. I couldn't keep the smile on my face any longer. Outside the hospital, I crouched on the roadside, biting an unlit cigarette, feeling bitter. This was the 4th year of my marriage to Leah Monroe. At that time, I had pursued her for nearly 4 years, doing everything I could just to be a part of her life. But now, even that tiny love was gone. I thought aimlessly, perhaps I have been lucky when I married Leah Monroe. Back then, she already had a boyfriend. I wasn't the type to break up relationships. I just quietly loved her without any overstepping. It wasn't until James Miller decided not to go abroad that I even dared to openly pursue her. After James Miller left, I stepped forward, and 4 years ago, Leah Monroe finally agreed to marry me. It was just a normal dinner between us. After we finished eating, she casually said, "Julian Rhodes, let's go get the marriage certificate someday." It took me 30 seconds to believe I hadn't misheard her. Once I realized, I quickly said, "Wait for me," and ran out. I only bought a bouquet of flowers because I was afraid, if I bought anything else, Leah Monroe might change her mind. My heart was racing, and my palms were sweaty from nerves. That night, I knelt down with the flowers, feeling my eyes burn with tears. I looked up at Leah Monroe, sitting on the chair wearing a beautiful dress, radiant and stunning. She had always been the way I liked her, whether back then or now. I made a heartfelt promise to her, word by word. "Leah Monroe, will you marry me? I will definitely treat you well." She took the flowers from my hands. At that moment, my floating heart finally settled. Afterward, I proposed again. It was a dreamlike, beautiful scene with gifts, rings, and all our family and friends witnessing it. Leah Monroe agreed to marry me, but I knew it wasn't because she liked me that much. Maybe it was because I had been so persistent, or maybe it was just time for her to settle down. If Leah Monroe wanted to get married, I would never refuse. We were married for 4 years, and I followed her around happily, satisfied to just be with her. She didn't love me much, but it didn't matter. My love for her was enough. If only Leah Monroe hadn't been in that car accident and her memory hadn't gone back to the time when she was in love with James Miller, her first love, I think I would have gladly lived this dream in my next life. The worst part wasn't that Leah Monroe hated me now or denied our marriage, but that James Miller had returned. Leah Monroe's first love, James Miller. This situation couldn't be hidden from him. When Leah Monroe woke up, both our families had gently told her that we had been married for 4 years. They even showed her our marriage certificate. Leah Monroe only glanced at it and then looked away. "So what, if we're married, we can get a divorce." Who knows what tricks he used to get me to marry him. And I clearly remember I was in love with James Miller. The more she said, the more agitated she became. Her body was still recovering, and her headaches were getting worse. The doctor advised us to be gentle with her and not to provoke her. After hearing this, I quietly stood outside the door, looking at Leah Monroe lying in bed for a long time. Then I told our parents not to bring it up in front of her anymore. I also packed the marriage certificate in a box and hid it at the bottom of the closet. All the photos we had taken together were packed into my suitcase. Every couple's item I had bought over the years was carefully stored away. I told myself it was okay if she forgot me or even hated me. I could always win her over again. But James Miller's return took me completely by surprise. He hadn't changed much from high school. He always had a gentle, humble demeanor, and his face was as warm as ever. I felt a pang of bitterness in my heart as I thought, James Miller might look gentle, but he could never take care of her the way I did. How could Leah Monroe not forget him? The next day, when I arrived at the hospital, I unexpectedly ran into James Miller. I had heard the news of his return from my childhood friend, Daniel Wilson, but I didn't expect him to come straight to the hospital. I stood there holding the soup I had made, feeling completely at a loss. They were talking to each other with no one else around, and suddenly Leah Monroe let out a soft laugh. Her pale face flushed with color, looking much more vibrant. When she saw me, the conversation stopped, and the atmosphere became awkward. I tightened my grip on the thermos and forced a smile, saying softly, "Lila, I made your favorite soup. You should drink it while it's hot." She hadn't said anything yet when James Miller's soft voice interrupted. "Lila, you've just recovered. This oily soup is too heavy for you. I brought some supplements instead." I froze. Leah Monroe's most serious injury, aside from her head, was to her foot. So, every time I visited, I'd make bone broth the night before and bring it the next day. Despite Leah Monroe always telling me to get lost, I knew she'd drink at least some of it after I left. But this time, I wasn't so sure. I set the soup aside, muttering, "I'm going out for a smoke," and quickly escaped. I felt a bit pathetic. Just before I left, I heard James Miller's voice. "He's still the same," Leah Monroe replied indifferently. "He's always been like that," her tone tinged with a hint of distaste. After that day, I didn't visit anymore. Instead, I had my parents bring food to Leah Monroe for me. The day before Leah Monroe was due to be discharged, my childhood friend, Daniel Wilson, called me out for a drink. He knew I'd been stressed lately and said he had something interesting to show me. When I arrived, I was surprised to find James Miller there as well. I paused, realizing what he had meant by something interesting. Daniel Wilson handed me a drink and then spoke. "You really don't know how to be a grandson, do you, James Miller? Back then, my buddy liked Leah, but you were still her boyfriend." He accepted it without saying a word. "But then you gave up on the relationship and went abroad. And Julian Rhodes, that idiot, spent 2 years chasing her before finally marrying Leah. Now, after the accident, you're here taking advantage of her vulnerability. What kind of man are you?" I had no idea how Daniel Wilson had managed to get James Miller here, but it was clear that he'd been drinking. Hearing this, I grabbed Daniel and said softly, "Stop drinking. Let's go home." Daniel, red-faced and pointing a finger at me, muttered angrily, "Are you a coward? She's your wife." I stayed silent. At that moment, James Miller suddenly stood in front of me, smiling as he said, "When I went abroad, Leah wanted to break up with me. So what? After all these years, don't you think she still loves me? Oh, by the way, you probably didn't know this, but when we were together, Leah was much more lovable than when she was with you. She would, ... Before he could finish, I punched him. Was I angry? Yes. Furious. Absolutely. This was the woman I'd loved for nearly 8 years. And because of one accident, all my efforts over those years were shattered. Who should I blame? Why did someone like him, such a scumbag, get to have her love without even trying? And after getting it so easily, why didn't he cherish it? What he took for granted was something I had to fight for. I cursed loudly, and in my rage hit him harder. In the end, James Miller lay on the ground, cradling his head, and I kicked him once more. "Don't talk about your past with her. You don't deserve it." The next day, I learned that Daniel Wilson had intended to let me vent, but James Miller had deliberately provoked me. The discharge had been scheduled for the afternoon, and when I was about to leave, I saw James Miller had already brought Leah Monroe back. He had the marks from the beating I'd given him the night before. "I ran into Leah at the hospital this morning, so I brought her back," he said. Leah Monroe stood in front of him, frowning at me. Julian Rhodes has apologized to James Miller. I froze for a moment, unable to say a word. James Miller tugged at Leah Monroe's hand. "Leah, don't worry. Julian was drunk last night. He just got carried away and hit me. An apology isn't necessary." His tone was gentle, as if trying to keep us from fighting. The scene was almost comical. I couldn't help but laugh. I laughed so hard I couldn't hold back a cough. After I regained my composure, I muttered, "James Miller, you really are despicable." His face darkened, but he didn't say anything. Julian Rhodes's, "James, is right. You haven't changed at all. You're still the same." Leah Monroe's face was full of disgust, as though I were nothing more than trash on the street. "In high school, you were just a guy who smoked, fought, and caused trouble. And now, you're still the same. You're still the same, and it still makes me hate you." I closed my eyes lightly, almost as if to punish myself, replaying her words over and over in my mind. Yes, I finally understood. To Leah Monroe, who had lost all memories of our 4 years together, there was nothing but disdain for me. It was just like when we first met in high school. She hated me so much that she would have walked around me if she could. But back then, even just a glance from her would make me happy for days. I lowered my head helplessly and, clutching onto my last shred of dignity, muttered, "Tell him to leave. This is our home. He's not welcome here." James Miller had achieved his goal. After a few gentle words with Leah Monroe, he dropped off his things and left. The next day, Leah Monroe handed me the divorce papers she had already signed. "This is the divorce agreement. Take a look. If there's no problem, just sign it." I was stunned. I looked away, not able to speak. "I won't sign," I finally said. Leah Monroe frowned, clearly impatient. "Why won't you sign? If it's for money, the assets are split evenly. I'll also give you an extra $1 million. This house was mine. I bought it with most of my savings, intending it to be our home." I took a deep breath, pushed the papers back to her, and said, "I won't sign." Leah Monroe glared at me angrily, as if she couldn't understand why I refused. Finally, unable to contain her frustration, she raised her voice. "I don't even like you. I like someone else. Are you still not going to sign?" After she said those words, the living room fell into a long silence. I managed to steady my emotions and responded hoarsely, "What you like?" "You just forgot." Leah Monroe was stunned. Finally, she stood up and left, leaving only a parting remark. "Do as you wish. Take your time if you want." I stood alone, staring at the empty living room, suddenly unsure how much longer I could hold on. From that day on, Leah Monroe and I fell into a cold war. Every day, I made dinner for her, but she wouldn't eat it. She slept in the master bedroom while I stayed in the guest room. Her foot injury from the car accident meant she couldn't stand for long. Knowing she couldn't swallow her pride, I made sure to prepare the meals and then left for my studio to work. When I came back, seeing that she had finished her food brought me a small sense of relief. Daniel Wilson found out and scolded me over the phone. "You're really pathetic. You know that?" At that moment, I was kneading dough, and his words caught me off guard. After a pause, I bitterly replied, "Daniel, she just doesn't remember." I had never told anyone, but during the 4 years that Leah Monroe agreed to marry me, she was never like this. Those 4 years, Leah Monroe had been a wonderful girlfriend. We did what ordinary couples did: dates, kisses, and love. On winter nights, I'd pick her up from work, and she would throw herself into my arms, snuggling her hands into mine. On the way home, she'd chatter away about amusing things that had happened at the office. We'd roll dice to decide who would cook and who would do the dishes, even if in the end, I was the one doing both. We'd go to the supermarket to buy everyday items, and she'd make me change my profile pictures to weird ones. We'd sit together in our pajamas, watching movies, betting on who the killer was. In the end, she'd get angry too. She would sulk and refuse to eat, changing her profile pictures and then telling me not to change mine. But when it came to work, she became the calm and elegant Leah, the manager. During those 4 years, when there were countless suitors chasing after her, Leah Monroe would firmly reject them all. So, having once earned her love made it all the more difficult to let go. I wanted to try harder. After all, I'd spent 8 years. What was 1 or 2 more? I would use every excuse to get her to visit the places we had been during those 4 years of marriage. I naively thought maybe this way Leah Monroe would remember. But without fail, every time we went, she'd either get a call from James Miller and leave, or she'd sit there chatting with him on her phone. Soon, Leah Monroe stopped going out with me altogether. During our conversations, I would try to talk about those 4 years, but Leah Monroe would rarely respond. If I talked too much, she'd impatiently interrupt me, asking me to stop. I'd watch her holding her phone, talking to James Miller, and I'd fall silent. In 2 weeks, it would be Leah Monroe's birthday. I had made reservations long in advance, and the private room was decorated beautifully, just the way she liked it. On her birthday, I woke up early and made her a bowl of longevity noodles. After she finished eating, I handed her the gift box. "Leah, happy birthday." Recently, Leah Monroe and I had slowly begun to return to something resembling friendship. She didn't resist me as much, and the argument about the divorce seemed to have been intentionally forgotten. But in my heart, I knew things could never go back to how they were during those 4 years. Leah Monroe said, "Thank you," and then asked, "Can I open it now?" I nodded. Inside was a dress. When she saw it, her eyes lit up with surprise. My heart, which had been tight with anxiety, loosened immediately. Then I said, "I've already made a dinner reservation at your favorite restaurant for tonight. If you like it, you can wear this." Afterward, I accompanied Leah Monroe to my parents' house for lunch and stayed until evening. That night, Leah Monroe and I were supposed to go to the restaurant I'd reserved. But after receiving a call, she hesitated and looked at me. "I need to step out for a bit to meet a friend. You go ahead. I'll be there soon." At the moment she picked up her phone, I saw the caller's name, James Miller. I watched as she rushed out the door, without even waiting for me to say anything, and I was speechless. I stood there watching her walk away without a glance back. I wanted to stop her, to ask if she would come back, but deep down, what I really wanted was to hold on to her, to keep her. In the end, I went alone to the restaurant. She said she'd come, so I waited for her. I sat there from 6 o'clock in the evening waiting. I sent her text messages, called her, but there was no answer. Eventually, her phone was turned off. I waited until midnight. 2 waiters, awkwardly glancing at each other, finally approached me. "Julian Rhodes, we're terribly sorry, but we're closing at 1 a.m. I froze. Half an hour ago, they had just brought me fresh food, but it had already cooled down. The cake I'd made myself was now sitting in the corner, and the roses had lost their vibrancy. The waiters looked at me with a mixture of pity and sympathy, which only made me feel more embarrassed. But what truly saddened me deep inside, it was that Leah Monroe had promised she'd come. Why did she lie? That night, when I returned, Leah Monroe never came back. I spent the entire night sitting alone in the living room. The next day, I saw Leah Monroe in James Miller's WeChat moments. Last night, James Miller had taken her to a music festival concert. She was wearing his jacket, and the smile on her face was one I hadn't seen in a long time, radiant and carefree, with tenderness and joy in her eyes, as if they were tangible. The timing was almost perfect. Just as I put my phone down, Leah Monroe came home. She looked at me sitting on the couch, and for a brief moment, her expression froze. Then, as if remembering something, she spoke in a flustered tone. "Sorry about last night. I completely forgot. I hadn't slept the whole night, and I felt truly exhausted at that moment." I raised the corner of my lips, wanting to say something, anything. I wanted to question her, to express my anger, or to say something else anything. But I realized I couldn't say anything at all. I felt empty. Seeing that I didn't speak, she hurriedly added, James Miller said he wanted to go to the music festival, so I went with him. My phone ran out of battery, and I didn't call you. You probably should have gone back after waiting for me last night. I lowered my eyes and whispered, I know. The atmosphere was too heavy. I stood up. I'm going to the studio. As I passed by her, she suddenly called my name. Julian Rhodeses. Don't you have anything else you want to ask? What could I ask? I didn't want to ask anything anymore. No. With that, I walked out. At that moment, I remembered my conversation with Daniel Wilson. How can you still think she'll remember you? How had I answered back then? I believe in her, I had said with absolute certainty. But Leah Monroe, I don't think I can hold on much longer. After that day, both Leah Monroe and I got busy with our respective work. I had my own photography studio, and she was occupied with year-end work at the company. Sometimes when things got hectic, we'd go 2 or 3 weeks without having a meal together. James Miller, on the other hand, posted several pictures of himself having meals with Leah Monroe on his WeChat moments. I knew he wanted me to see them. As I looked at those pictures, I suddenly felt indifferent. The feeling of whatever washed over me. It was as if my entire life had been revolving around Leah Monroe for so long. I had told Daniel Wilson I wanted to try to make Leah Monroe remember me, but somewhere along the way, without realizing it, that thread had quietly unraveled. At the end of this month, our high school class president suddenly organized a reunion. I hadn't planned on attending, but the class president messaged me a few times, saying he had something important to discuss and that I had to come. I thought about it and cleared my schedule for that evening. But deep down, I wondered if Leah Monroe would show up. That night she did, and she came with James Miller. At that time, my marriage to Leah Monroe was kept low-key, known only to a few close friends. Almost no one from high school knew about it. So when they walked in together, everyone assumed Leah Monroe and James Miller were a couple. One of our drunk classmates looked at them and, with his mouth hanging open, exclaimed, "No way. You two are really still together after all these years." I watched as Leah Monroe opened her mouth, about to say something, but James Miller cut in before she could. "It's been so long since we've seen each other. We have to catch up, don't we?" His ambiguous response blurred the lines of their relationship. I looked at Leah Monroe, unknowingly, hoping for something, anything. But no, she just smiled, and then started chatting with others. She didn't look at me even once, as if I were just another classmate from high school. The thread inside me grew lighter, so light that I could barely hold on to it anymore. Halfway through the reunion, the class president sent me a message asking me to step outside for a chat. It wasn't until my cigarette was nearly finished that Ryan Taylor, the class president, finally spoke. "You liked Leah Monroe back in high school, right?" This wasn't exactly a secret back then. It wouldn't have surprised anyone if someone liked Leah Monroe. But the next thing Ryan said left me stunned. "You were the one who helped Leah Monroe get rid of those delinquents behind the school, right? And the one who secretly left candy on her desk for an entire semester?" I instinctively asked. "How do you know?" Ryan patted me on the shoulder. "Julian Rhodeses. I'm sorry. I saw it and I knew it was you. But back then, when Leah Monroe thought all of that was from James Miller, I didn't step forward to tell her the truth. I suddenly couldn't hear anything. It felt like I had missed a step and was falling down a staircase, my heart skipping a beat. It took me a long time to come back to my senses. Back then, before she and James Miller got together, I wrote her a love letter and told her everything. How could she think James Miller was the one who left it? Ryan was also stunned, furrowing his brow. "I don't know about that. But when James Miller took Leah Monroe out to dinner to celebrate getting together, he admitted that he was the one who did all those things." A bad feeling suddenly rose in my chest. Before I could collect my thoughts, a cloud of smoke filled the air and a loud alarm suddenly rang out, causing a group of people to rush out of the restaurant. It was on fire. I froze, and as the reality sank in, my first instinct was to run back inside. Leah Monroe was still inside. Ryan instinctively grabbed me. "What are you doing? It's too dangerous inside. Don't go in." I broke free from his grip. Leah Monroe is still inside. At that moment, because we had been trying to keep our voices down to avoid disturbing others, the restaurant had reserved a private room for us in the farthest corner of the second floor. By the time I rushed in, the first floor of the restaurant was a chaotic mess. Everyone was running out in a panic, desperately trying to escape the spreading flames. The fire was growing larger. When I reached the second floor, most people still didn't know what had happened. Some were already so drunk they were out cold, while others, still sober, began waking up the unconscious ones and dragging them toward the exit. I scanned the room and spotted Leah Monroe. I rushed over, grabbed her hand, and started pulling her toward the exit. We didn't say a word to each other. She gripped my hand tightly and followed me. But as we passed the restroom, she hesitated, glancing back and saying, "James Miller. He just went to the bathroom." I froze, looking at her anxious eyes, but didn't say anything. Feeling her desire to go back, I tightened my grip and pulled her toward the door. "There's no time, we have to go." But before she could finish, I forcefully led her outside. By the time we reached the ground floor, the emergency services had arrived, and the fire was slowly being brought under control. That's when I noticed a large abrasion on my arm. I hadn't felt it earlier, but now it throbbed painfully. Leah Monroe immediately began scanning the crowd as soon as we were outside. Thinking of what Ryan Taylor had said earlier, I urgently wanted an answer. Forgetting the relief of surviving the fire, I blurted out, "Leah Monroe, you know about the candy I left on your desk for an entire semester, and about the person who chased away those bullies for you. Do you know it was James Miller?" The rest of the words got stuck in my throat. I watched as Leah Monroe suddenly ran toward James Miller, standing a few feet away. Her eyes were red, and she sighed in relief. "You're all right, thank goodness." The sight of them embracing tightly in the distance stabbed at my heart. The thread I had been holding on to snapped, and everything fell apart. The scene was all too familiar. I remembered back in high school when James Miller had gotten into a fight with someone. I had just passed by and watched the commotion. Coincidentally, the person James Miller fought was someone I knew. When Leah Monroe arrived and saw me, she immediately assumed I had sent someone to pick a fight with James Miller. She glared at me. "Julian Rhodes, I really regret it. I regret ever helping you. You bullied other students, always causing trouble. Did you never learn how to respect anyone? You're the kind of person I thought would change." But I was wrong. Her disgust was so obvious that I couldn't find the words to respond. I wanted to tell her it wasn't true. I didn't cause trouble. I didn't ask anyone to harm James Miller. I wanted to say that I wasn't that bad. The manager at work had praised me today for being diligent. I had saved up my part-time earnings, and I wasn't disrespectful to anyone. But suddenly, I went silent. My throat felt dry, and I couldn't say a word. I looked at James Miller, hoping he would speak up and clarify that this wasn't my fault. But James Miller only glanced at me, saying nothing. All I could do was watch as Leah Monroe clung to him and walked past me step by step. At first, I hadn't planned on writing that letter, clearing up everything I had done. But deep down, I didn't want to be the person Leah Monroe thought I was. I didn't want her to feel that being loved by someone like me was something unbearable. I had spent a week writing dozens of failed letters before, finally writing one that wasn't too forced, a letter for Leah Monroe. In it, I admitted that I had a bit of a temper back then, but I never bullied anyone. I told her I had liked her for a long time. I wrote that it was me who chased away the bullies that one night when she was having a bad day, and that I had run off afterward to avoid any misunderstanding. I also wrote that it was me who, for an entire semester, placed different candies on her desk every day, trying to cheer her up. There were many more things, but what I really wanted to say was this: "I like you so much, Leah Monroe. Honestly, I'm not as bad as you think." But Ryan had told me tonight that Leah Monroe didn't know. She didn't know that I was the one who had done those things. My letter perhaps was lost in that corner, trampled on, and became dirty. For all these years, my love and courage were never known. But when I saw Leah Monroe rush toward James Miller in the midst of danger, it no longer mattered whether she had opened the letter back then or not. I wasn't really concerned anymore. I think I've accepted it now. My love was never acknowledged, and in her memory, I'm still that same person she couldn't stand and changed, as always. It didn't matter whether Leah Monroe knew it was me. I realized I really couldn't continue this journey with her anymore. That night, I gave one last glance at the two of them in the distance, then turned and left. I went to the hospital to get my arm patched up. By the time I got home, it was nearly 1 a.m. when I walked in. The lights were on, and Leah Monroe's eyes brightened. "You're back." I didn't say anything. I went straight to the bathroom to wash my face, trying to wake myself up a bit. She followed me, talking as she went. "I looked everywhere for you earlier. I called you, but you didn't answer. You must be tired tonight. I packed some food for you. Come eat." "Wait, what happened to your hand? Did you just get hurt? Have you been to the hospital yet? Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "I could have gone with you." Leah Monroe began to speak, but I interrupted her. "Leah Monroe, I've agreed to the divorce." I never thought I'd be the one to say those words, especially given how much I've loved her. I had convinced myself that I would never utter them, but in the end, I overestimated myself. I thought to myself, "Leah Monroe, this is where it ends. Let's put a full stop to these 10 years of my life." After saying that, I turned to leave. "It's too late today. I'll pack my things and leave tomorrow." Leah Monroe reached out to stop me. "Why did you suddenly change your mind about the divorce?" My head was throbbing with pain, and I didn't want to say anything. I lightly pulled away from her grip. "The agreement can be redrawn by your lawyer. I don't want your money or the property. You can do whatever you want with that." I was so tired. My body felt like a rusty machine, too difficult to move. Behind me, Leah Monroe's trembling voice followed. "Julian Rhodes, are you sure? You said it yourself. Once we divorce, there's no going back." I didn't stop walking. Yeah, no going back. Lying on my bed, I thought, I really do need a break. That night, I had many dreams of my childhood, of high school Leah Monroe, and of the Leah Monroe I married during those 4 years. but the one thing that never changed was the look of disdain she had in her eyes. I woke up to find it was almost 11 a.m. I took my time to get up and start packing. There wasn't much to pack, and I finished quickly. As I went downstairs, I had expected to find the divorce papers on the table, given how urgently Leah Monroe had wanted the divorce. But instead, there was breakfast freshly made. I froze for a moment. Leah Monroe was sitting on the couch, acting as though nothing had happened, and called out to me. "I made breakfast. Come try it." A few moments ago, I would have been thrilled, but now, looking at it, I felt no joy at all. All I felt was resignation. I shook my head. "No, I'm not hungry. When you have time, you can text me so we can go ahead and finalize the divorce." She paused before adding, "James Miller, I don't think he's someone you should trust. You might want to reconsider." If James Miller really was in the bathroom that night, I wouldn't have been so quick to disregard someone's life. But when I hurried back to the restaurant, I saw James Miller running out of the bathroom in a panic. I picked up my suitcase and was about to leave when I heard the sound of something breaking. Leah Monroe shouted, "Julian Rhodes, if you leave, don't ever come back." I had lived in this house for 4 years, but as I stepped out, my heart ached with a sharp pang. In my mind, I told myself, "Julian Rhodes, it's really over this time." I went back to the studio, intending to finish a few photo shoots I had scheduled with clients. In the days that followed, I waited for news from Leah Monroe. But the message never came until one night I received a text from her. "Julian Rhodes, there's a thief in the house. I'm scared." Without a second thought, I dropped the camera I was holding and rushed toward Leah Monroe. I made it there as quickly as I could. When I arrived, the living room was in chaos. Pillows and blankets were scattered across the floor. The property, security, and police were already at the door. Leah Monroe was sitting on the floor. I took a deep breath, scanning her from head to toe. Seeing that she wasn't injured, I felt a little relieved. I whispered, "Can you stand up?" Leah Monroe shook her head and immediately reached out to wrap her arms around my neck. Reluctantly, I picked her up and laid her down on the couch. After explaining things to the police, I turned on the TV for her and asked her to watch for a while. I started cleaning up the living room while giving her some instructions. "You should stay with your parents for now. Once the thief is caught, you can come back. When you do come back, make sure to remove the keys. If you hear any noises, lock yourself in the room and don't come out. Call the police. If anything happens, call the police immediately. I can't always be available to take your calls." I stopped suddenly as I realized Leah Monroe might not want to hear me giving her instructions. "Julian Rhodes, my stomach hurts." I reflexively asked, "Did you not have dinner?" She nodded, and I sighed as I walked toward the kitchen. As I started boiling the noodles, it hit me what I was doing. Suddenly, I felt hands on my waist. I froze. When I realized it was Leah Monroe, I instinctively tried to pull away. With a tearful voice, she said, "Julian Rhodes, I regret it. Let's not divorce. Can we not do this?" I said, "Nothing." I just quietly finished cooking the noodles and placed them on the table for her. Once she finished eating, I spoke up. "Leah Monroe, you should make sure to eat properly. Even when you're alone. When someone loses their memory, it feels like the habits deeply ingrained in their soul can't be erased." Leah Monroe had become accustomed to having me by her side. When she was hungry, I would complain a little while making her food. When she was cold, I would remind her to put on more clothes. But when that person suddenly disappears, she seems completely lost. I thought to myself, but this is only a false memory. After hearing about my divorce from Leah Monroe, my childhood friend Daniel Wilson was silent for a long time. Finally, he sighed and asked, "Are you sure about this?" I held my glass, lost in thought. I nodded in response. "I'm planning to close the studio for a while next year and take some time to travel," I said, though there was still one thing left to settle. Leah Monroe still hadn't given me the divorce papers. Reluctantly, I had to take the initiative and message her to ask when she'd have time. But Leah Monroe bounced back with excuses, either work or family meals. After a few attempts, I understood what she was really saying. With the end of the year approaching, I became swamped with work, and I ended up forgetting about the divorce for a while. This dragged on, and before I knew it, it was the new year. During this time, both of our parents began to notice the tension between us. In previous years, both our families would gather to celebrate the holiday, but this year, it didn't feel appropriate. I explained it to my parents in advance. Just the day before New Year's Eve, I received a call from Leah Monroe. "Julian Rhodes, would you come to my place for dinner tonight?" It seemed like she was worried I might refuse, so she quickly added, "My parents want to meet you." Since she had brought up her parents, I had no choice but to agree. That evening, I bought some gifts and went to pick Leah Monroe up from her office before heading to her parents' house for dinner. The meal was relatively pleasant, and we didn't mention the divorce in front of her parents. After dinner, I helped Leah Monroe clear the table, and then I suggested we leave. She put on her coat and walked me to the parking lot, then spoke up slowly. "At first, when I woke up, I wanted to divorce you." I ignored the hurt in my heart and tried to sound casual. "Yeah, you even told me to leave, saying, you didn't want my soup." Leah Monroe smiled faintly. As we walked, her smile suddenly faded. She paused for a moment, then continued. When I woke up, I thought I liked James Miller. But when I was with him, I wasn't that happy. When you told me you wanted a divorce, I felt so strange, so upset. Julian Rhodes's, it's strange. I don't even remember how I felt about you, but why does it still hurt so much? She grabbed my hand. Julian Rhodes's, can we not divorce? Can we start over? My heart tightened. Finally, I reached into my bag and handed her a red envelope. Leah, Happy New Year. We can't go back. Not every mistake can be fixed, and I can't always be so relentless. After the new year, I had more free time. Leah Monroe started messaging me frequently after that night. Sometimes she would come to my studio. Other times she'd call me with excuses to meet. This continued until last week. This week, Leah Monroe suddenly stopped messaging me so frequently. I only received one text from her inviting me to meet at a cafe this week. When I arrived, Leah Monroe was wearing a dark coat with a scarf, her hair cascading down her back. When she saw me, she smiled. Julian Rhodes's, you're here. That's when I realized something wasn't quite right. I hesitated. You've regained your memory. Leah Monroe nodded silently. After learning that Leah Monroe had regained her memory, both of us fell into silence. She looked at me and said, I'm sorry for everything that happened after I lost my memory. I sighed. My thoughts tangled in 1,000 different directions. If only Leah Monroe had remembered sooner, or if I could have held on just a bit longer. But there's no if in life. That was my limit. Leah Monroe was quiet for a while before she continued. James Miller came back to the country because he lost money while helping someone start a business abroad. When he heard about my situation, he rushed back, hoping I would give him money. Hearing this, I exhaled in relief. Since Leah Monroe had already figured things out, she surely wouldn't stay with James Miller. In fact, given her personality, she probably wouldn't make things easy for him. After discussing the things that needed to be addressed, the topic of divorce inevitably came up. Looking at the woman I had loved for nearly 10 years, I felt only regret and bitterness in my heart. I'm sorry about the divorce. Are you still insisting on going through with it? I nodded. We signed the agreement and we agreed to go to the Civil Affairs office the following Monday. But just before I left, Leah Monroe softly said, I didn't know that the person who helped me chase off the thugs and who left candy on my desk for a whole semester was you. I always thought it was James Miller. Her voice trembled. Julian Rhodes, I'm sorry. It seemed like no one was really to blame. It was just bad luck on my part. I had always been missing the mark. It wasn't until 4 years ago that Leah Monroe finally agreed to marry me. I stayed silent for a long time after hearing this, saying nothing. That night, before going to bed, I thought to myself, I really had the worst luck back then. After completing all the procedures, I did what I had planned. I closed the studio and stopped taking new projects. I started planning my travel routes for the year. But then, I heard from Daniel Wilson about James Miller. Apparently, he was being chased by debt collectors. He had no money left and had no choice but to borrow from old classmates one by one. Everyone knew who he was, so no one was willing to lend him money. Some even took the opportunity to kick him when he was down. His reputation, once so important to him, was now completely ruined. When Daniel Wilson told me this, he sounded delighted. Let this bastard suffer the consequences. Karma has finally come around. I smiled and hung up the phone, then continued working on my travel plans. I spent an entire year traveling. I saw many places I had never had the chance to visit before. During that year, I still thought about Leah Monroe. Sometimes, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow and regret about our relationship. I couldn't blame her, but it seemed like I couldn't quite forgive her either. So, I decided to leave it to time. Maybe one day we'll be strangers or classmates or friends or even enemies. But it seems like we'll never be lovers again. Perhaps when I finally let go, I'll find myself sitting across from Leah Monroe again, having a drink and chatting about old times, about the silly things I did when I was in love with her. And maybe we'll talk about the year I spent learning to let go of.